The sky was a dull gray as James walked down the quiet street before sunrise. His breath formed small clouds in the cool air. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and hurried toward the corner cafe he visited each morning. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him, carrying the rich smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. He nodded to the barista, who was already steaming milk and tapping at the register. A few tables away, a woman in a sharp suit stood at the counter. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she carried herself with calm confidence. She seemed focused and calm, yet her eyes held a hint of fatigue. James watched as she ordered a latte and reached for her wallet, only to pause and look puzzled. The barista explained gently that her card had been declined. The woman's brow furrowed, and she offered her phone as an alternative, but the barista shook his head. She let out a soft sigh. James felt a tug in his chest. Here was someone having an awkward moment on a chilly morning. He glanced at his own coffee, already paid for and waiting. He thought of his paycheck and his modest savings, and he knew he had enough. Quietly, he approached the counter. When the barista looked at him, James smiled and said, "I'll cover her latte." The barista raised his eyebrows but rang up the woman's drink under James's order. The woman turned, surprise spreading across her face. She looked at James, her voice soft but bright. "Are you sure? Thank you so much." James waved away her gratitude. "No problem at all," he said. "It's a busy morning. Happens to the best of us." He managed a friendly smile before stepping back to let her pass. She paid him in return only with words. "Thank you," she said again. Her eyes, dark and curious, met his for a moment before she picked up her latte and stepped aside. James returned to his usual table by the window. He sat down and took a sip of his coffee. It was still hot and tasted of caramel and cinnamon. He watched the woman from the corner of his eye. She stood near the pastries, considering a croissant, but then shook her head and wandered toward the door. She paused before stepping out into the rain and glanced back at James. He nodded in a gesture that said, "All good," and she smiled. It was a small smile, quick and genuine. Then she turned and disappeared into the misty morning. James felt warmth in his chest that went beyond the coffee. He packed up his laptop, paid his bill, and pushed open the door. Outside, the rain had begun in earnest. James lifted his collar and headed for the train station. He thought about his day, had emails to answer, reports to finish, a meeting with his manager. He tried not to dwell on the moment at the cafe. After all, it was nothing more than a small gesture between strangers. But in his mind, the image of her surprised face stayed with him, calm and elegant even in an awkward moment. He boarded the train and found a seat near the window. The carriage was nearly empty at this hour. He opened his laptop and started drafting a report. Every so often, he glanced at the passing city streets blurred by rain. His mind wandered back to the cafe, wondered about her job, her life, what had made her rush so early. He thought about how quickly we can judge someone by a single moment. Perhaps she was usually more careful with her cards, or maybe her bank had made a mistake. He imagined her walking in tall buildings later that day, ordering coffee for her team, or greeting important clients. At each stop, more commuters filled the train. The air grew warmer, and conversations rose in volume. James closed his laptop and stood when the train neared his station, pressed his forehead against the window and watched the city blur by. When the doors slid open, he stepped out onto the platform, pulled his coat around him, and walked toward his office building. Inside, he swiped his card, and the turnstile clicked open. He took the elevator to the 10th floor and greeted his coworkers. In the hallway, settled at his desk, ready to start the day. As he turned on his computer, he thought once more of the woman in the cafe. He wondered if he would ever see her again. Perhaps their paths would never cross. To him, it was a kind act shared in a brief moment. Yet something about that chance encounter had made his morning brighter. Across town, the woman walked through the revolving doors of a tall office tower. The lobby was polished with marble floors and glass elevators. She adjusted her briefcase and pressed the button for the top floor. Her shoes clicked against the floor as she prepared for her busy schedule. She greeted a receptionist by name and asked to speak with her assistant. The assistant appeared, professional and polite, and guided her toward her office. Inside her suite, the walls were lined with books on business and leadership. A wall of windows gave a view of the city's skyline, skyscrapers reaching toward the clouds. She set her latte on the desk and took a deep breath. There were emails to send, strategy meetings to attend, budgets to review. Her world was one of numbers and plans, of big decisions and the lives affected by them. Yet earlier, in a small cafe on a rainy morning, she had faced a moment of embarrassment. That moment had reminded her that kindness could come from the most unexpected places. She thought of the man who had helped her. She did not know his name. He seemed ordinary, maybe an office worker, perhaps a freelancer. He had not asked for recognition or praise. He had stepped forward simply because it felt right. She kept the memory of his face in her mind. It was not the face of a CEO or a figure of authority. It was the face of someone who cared enough to act when it mattered to another person. In her busy day, she penned a short note on a sticky pad. Remember small kindnesses. She placed it on the edge of her computer screen. Later, when she met with her assistant to discuss the day's schedule, she shared the memory of the man. In the cafe and his simple act, sometimes the smallest moments remind us why we do what we do, she said, her voice calm but firm. The assistant nodded and smiled. By noon, the rain had stopped. The gray clouds shifted, and sunlight broke through in brilliant streams. The office tower, the air conditioning hummed softly. The woman took another sip of her latte before turning her attention to a conference call. On the other side of town, James ate a sandwich at his desk and glanced at the clock. He still wondered about her, if she had replaced her card, if she had made it to work dry, if she had remembered his face at all. But he did not reach out. He believed that some moments should remain simple and unclaimed, left to echo quietly. In memory, he focused on his work, drafting graphs and editing paragraphs. Yet every few minutes he thought of the woman's grateful eyes and her gentle thank you. He smiled to himself, grateful for the reminder that kindness could appear on an ordinary morning. Behind the counter of a small cafe, where two strangers became briefly connected by a small gesture that cost one almost nothing but mattered deeply to the other. ChatGPT said, James walked into the glass lobby of his small office building without much thought. His mind was full of numbers and charts from his morning meeting. He pressed the button for the elevator and waited, tapping his foot against the marble floor. The walls around him were cold and white, and a few potted plants tried to bring life to the space. A receptionist sat at a desk nearby, focused on her computer. She looked up and smiled as James reached the desk. Afternoon, James, she said. Your guest is here to see you. James blinked. He had not invited anyone. He frowned as he glanced at the name badge she handed him. It read Emma Fletcher. He felt a jolt run through him. Emma Fletcher, the name sounded familiar, but he could not place it. My guest? He asked, forcing a polite voice. The receptionist nodded and pointed toward the waiting area. A few people sat in chairs, reading magazines or scrolling on their phones. James walked slowly to the chairs and scanned the faces. One woman rose as he approached, smoothing her jacket. His heart skipped a beat. It was the same woman from the cafe that rainy morning. She stood tall and calm, her dark hair in a neat bun, the leather briefcase at her side. Her eyes met his, and she gave a small, welcoming nod. He realized then that this was not a chance meeting. She was here for a reason. He cleared his throat. Hi, you're Emma, she smiled warmly. Yes, and you must be James. Her voice had the same bright, gentle tone he remembered. He felt his cheeks heat up. Yes. I'm James. Please, come this way. He led her toward the elevators. Inside, he pressed the button for the 10th floor. He tried to act normal, but his heart pounded. He thought of his morning coffee, the warm caramel taste, and her surprised face when he had paid for her latte. He wondered if she remembered it as clearly as he did. On the 10th floor, the corridor was lined with framed photos of company events. He guided Emma to his small cubicle. It was neat, with a laptop, a few family photos, and a stack of folders. He offered her the only visitor chair. She sat and set her briefcase on her lap. James closed the door to create privacy. "I guess the big question is, why are you here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emma looked at him with a calm expression. "Tomorrow marks the final step in our acquisition of this firm," she said softly. "I came today to introduce myself and to meet the team." She paused, then added with a friendly glance, "including the man who showed me kindness when I needed it most." James swallowed. His mind spun. Acquisition. She. Was the CEO of the company buying his small firm? He felt a mix of shock and embarrassment. I had no idea," he managed. "I mean, I didn't know who you were that morning. I was just helping someone in trouble." Emma's eyes lit up. "And that is exactly why I wanted to meet. We do a lot of corporate deals, and it's easy to forget the human side of things. That morning, your act reminded me why I started this company, to help people." James leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. "I never expected to meet you like this. I'm honored, but also a little nervous." Shh! Laughed softly, a sound that put him at ease. "Wait. You don't have to be. I believe in merit. Your work speaks for itself, and so does your character." She opened her briefcase, took out a small notepad, and handed it to him. "I'd like your ideas. You know this team and this culture better than I do." He blinked. His ideas? Diaz. Acquisition. He felt a flush of confidence at her trust. He picked up the notepad and scribbled notes as she spoke. They discussed the transition plan, how to welcome new team members, and ways to keep the morale strong. Emma listened intently to every suggestion. As they talked, James noticed how approachable she was. She spoke in simple language, asked questions, and made him feel that his voice mattered. No hint of arrogance showed in her tone or posture. She nodded when he described the small habits that kept the old team motivated: weekly breakfasts, a friendly chat by the coffee machine, open office hours for managers. He told her about the interns who struggled to find their way, and she immediately leaned forward, her attention fully on him. "I'd like to meet them," she said.
"At their
"Feedback on how we can help them grow." James felt pride swell in his chest. He had never imagined a CEO caring so deeply about the smallest details. They mapped out a plan for a town hall meeting where Emma would speak directly to every employee and encourage open dialogue. She insisted on walking the floors, shaking hands, and learning names. The hour passed quickly. They moved from his cubicle to the conference room, where a team meeting was scheduled in minutes. Emma closed her notepad and stood with him. "You, James," she said. "Your insight is invaluable. I needed to hear from someone who lives this day to day." He nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose. In her presence, he felt seen. He had always done his job well, but no one had ever paused to ask for his opinion at this level. He realized that a simple act of kindness had transformed into a professional opportunity he could not have dreamed of. They walked down the corridor, together toward the conference room. Coworkers peeked out from their cubicles, surprised to see the CEO by James's side. Some faces showed curiosity, others respect. James could hear whispered comments. "Who's that with her?" And "Is that our CEO?" He held his head high. He had earned this moment, he thought, not by seniority or degrees, but by genuine human connection. In the conference room, Emma took her place at the head of the table. James stood near the back, watching as she greeted each person, speaking their names and asking about their work. Earth filled the room. The usual tension of an acquisition. Meeting lifted. People smiled, relaxed, and shared their thoughts. When it was Emma's turn to speak, she told the story of the rainy morning, of James's gesture at the cafe. She did not name him at first. She spoke of a kind stranger who reminded her why people matter more than profits. The room hung on every word. Then she pointed to James. "This is James," she said. "He showed me a simple act of kindness. And now he's helping guide the future of this company." The room erupted in applause. James felt his face grow warm. His coworkers looked at him with new appreciation. Emma returned to her seat and began the meeting, inviting everyone's input. The energy was different, hopeful instead of anxious. Afterward, when the meeting ended, a few colleagues approached James to shake his hand. They congratulated him on sharing the stage with the CEO. He laughed and thanked them, still stunned by how life could turn in an instant. Later that afternoon, Emma returned to James's cubicle with 2 cups of coffee, one for her and one for him. She placed his on his desk, the foam art still perfect. She smiled at him and said, "I remembered you like strong coffee with a bit of sweetness." James took a slow sip and grinned. "You remembered?" She nodded. "I pay attention to details." She sat on the edge of his desk. "James, I want you on my core transition team. Your voice is important." Felt his chest tighten in happiness. He managed to say, "I'd be honored." She stood and brushed imaginary lint from her suit. "Thank you for trusting me with your ideas. We'll make this a smooth change for everyone." He nodded, and she turned to leave. At the door she paused, looking back at him. "And thank you again for that morning. You never know how one small act can shape the future." James watched her walk away. His heart was full. The ordinary day had turned extraordinary, all because of a latte and a kind gesture. He picked up his coffee and took another sip, savoring the warmth. He knew that life had more surprises in store, and he was ready for them. Emma arrived at the community center early the next morning. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, a change from her usual suit. James met her in the lobby, carrying a stack of brochures. The room was bright and filled with folding chairs. Long tables held stacks of donated clothes, canned food, and school supplies. Emma smiled at him and said, "Thank you for coming." James nodded, feeling both excited and nervous. He had never worked on a charity event before. Emma gestured toward the items on the tables. "These will go to families in need next week," she explained. "But first, we need a plan." They moved to a corner table and spread out the brochures. Emma asked James to share his ideas. Interns he had met, the small routines that made them feel welcome. "What if we include handwritten notes with each bag?" he suggested. "A few words of encouragement can go a long way." Emma's eyes lit up. "That's perfect," she said softly.
Ow.
They wrote sample notes together, choosing warm words. "You matter. You are not alone. Keep going." James watched as Emma carefully set each note atop a bag. He felt a new admiration for her attention to detail. As the morning sun climbed higher, more volunteers arrived. Emma greeted each person by name, asking about their day and listening with genuine interest. A local teacher brought boxes of notebooks, and Emma hugged her hello. James helped sort the notebooks by grade level. He watched how Emma made everyone feel seen. She laughed at a volunteer's quick joke and offered a kind word to someone who seemed shy. At lunchtime, she invited James to walk with her to a nearby cafe. He agreed, curious to learn more about the woman behind the title. They walked under a clear sky, the city sound around them soft and busy. Emma ordered 2 sandwiches and bottled water. She handed one to James and said, "I want to tell you why I care so much about this work." He nodded, listening as they found a sunny bench in the park across the street. She took a small bite and looked at him. "I grew up in a town not far from here," she began. "My mother was a teacher, and my father fixed cars." She paused, chewing thoughtfully. "Money was always tight, but my parents gave what they could. They told me that success is not only what you earn, but what you give back." James leaned forward. He imagined her as a young girl, watching her parents work long hours and still find time to help neighbors. "That must have shaped you," he said quietly. Emma smiled, nodding. "It did. I started my first small business when I was in college. I sold handmade scarves and used the profits to tutor kids in math." She laughed softly. "I wasn't rich then, but I discovered that every bit helps." Over the years, the company grew, and I never forgot that first lesson. They finished their lunch and returned to the community center. James carried empty bottles and wrappers. Inside, Emma introduced him to the center's director. She shook the director's hand and said, "This is James Brooks. He has been a big help with planning." The director beamed and thanked James for his ideas. James felt proud and a little shy. Together they organized the tables, stacking food cans and labeling shelves. Emma moved through the room, making sure each volunteer knew what to do. In the afternoon, they loaded a delivery van with supplies. James and Emma lifted heavy boxes, passing them to each other with teamwork and laughter. Emma joked when a box felt heavier than expected. James pretended to struggle until she patted his shoulder and said, "Don't leave me alone here." He loaded the last box and stepped back to admire their work. The room looked ready. Neat rows of donations, bright notes attached, volunteers buzzing with excitement. After the center closed, Emma and James stayed behind to finalize details. They sat at the same corner table, adding phone numbers and addresses to the delivery list. Emma asked James about his family. He told her about his sister and how they both loved painting houses together when they were kids. She listened, genuinely interested. Then she shared a memory of her own, her father teaching her how to change a tire on a rainy night when they were stranded. He had laughed and spoiled his suit. Emma chuckled as she told the story, and James saw how much she missed those simple moments. By early evening, the plan was complete. Emma looked around the empty room and breathed a quiet sigh of satisfaction. "Thank you, James," she said. "You have a real gift for seeing the small things that matter." He shrugged, feeling a warm glow. "I just tried to help," he replied. She smiled and handed him a fresh cup of tea. I want to hear more of your thoughts in the coming weeks," she said. "Would you join my core philanthropic team?" James felt his heart lift. "I would love to," he said without hesitation. Emma stood and walked toward the door. She turned and called back, "Tomorrow, we visit the first family. Be ready." He nodded, closing his notepad. The next morning, James joined Emma on her drive to a modest home on the city's edge. She navigated through busy streets with ease. At the house, a mother and her young child waited at the door. Emma knelt down to speak to the child, asking about school and favorite games. James handed over a bag of food and the note they had written together. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She thanked Emma and James, hugging both of them. As they stepped back, James felt a lump in his throat. Emma touched his arm and whispered, "See, your idea matters." On the drive back, they were quiet. Rain began to fall, soft and steady. Emma kept her eyes on the road. James watched the raindrops slide down the window, thought of the day at the cafe when he covered her latte. He realized how that single act had led him here. A small kindness had opened the door to friendship, to real work that changed lives, and to understanding a woman who was more than her title. When they returned to the office tower, Emma parked in the underground garage. She turned to James and said, "I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled and replied, "You gave me the chance." She nodded and patted his shoulder. As they walked toward the elevators, James felt a new sense of purpose. He had learned something important, that every small idea, every moment of care, could grow into something much bigger. In the days that followed, Emma and James met often. They planned more visits, organized more events, and shared more stories. James watched Emma remain humble, despite the praise she received. He saw how she remembered the names of volunteers, how she asked about each person's day, and how her kindness inspired others. He felt proud to be part of her team and grateful for the chance encounter in the cafe. Late one evening, as they locked up the community center, Emma turned to James. "Thank you for believing in me," she said softly. James paused, surprised. "I believe in both of us," he said. She smiled and walked away. Leaving him with a sense that their work together was only beginning, James locked the door and headed home. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. He thought of Emma's childhood, her parents' lessons, and the first time he saw her coffee cup at the cafe, he realized that behind every title, every suit, there is a story of struggle, of hope, and of kindness. And he felt lucky to learn hers. Office chatter drifted through the air like a low hum as James stepped onto the 10th floor. He paused by the elevators, smoothing his tie and straightening his jacket. He felt a familiar thrill when he thought of Emma's faith in him. He had joined her core transition team, and had spent weeks helping shape the new culture. But today felt different. He sensed eyes watching him as he walked down the corridor. At his desk, he found a sticky note tucked beneath his keyboard. Someone had written, "Nice perks, James." Wide. He frowned and crumpled the note in his hand. It was small, but it stung. He glanced around. His coworkers pretended to type, pretending nothing was wrong, yet they avoided looking at him. He set the note on his desk and took a deep breath, telling himself not to let it bother him. Later that morning, he joined Emma in the conference room for a team meeting. As he took his seat at the table, he noticed a few looks of cold reserve. A senior manager, Carla, cleared her throat. "I understand you and the CEO are working closely," she said quietly. "Some of us feel left out of key discussions." Her words were calm, but the undercurrent was sharp. James closed his eyes for a moment before opening them. He met Carla's gaze steadily. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said. "Emma invited me to share input because I know this team well. I'm happy to include anyone who wants to help." He kept his voice measured. Emma raised her hand. "Carla, I appreciate your honesty. The goal is to bring everyone in. Welcome your suggestions." Her tone was respectful but firm. The room shifted. Other managers exchanged glances. Emma invited them one by one to speak. Slowly, the atmosphere softened. Ideas flowed about how to involve the whole department. James listened and took notes, feeling relief as the meeting moved past tension into collaboration. After the meeting, James returned to his cubicle. He found another note. "Is she your girlfriend now?" With a crude smiley face. He sighed and tore it up. He knew whispers would follow him wherever he went. Just then, Emma walked by. She noticed his troubled face. She paused and asked, "Everything okay?" He offered a small smile and said, "Just the usual pushback." "Office politics?" She nodded, her eyes gentle. "Politics can be hard, but I'd rather have honest feedback than silence." She placed a hand on his shoulder before moving on. Her support warmed him. That afternoon, James met Emma in her office. She closed the door behind him and gestured toward two chairs near her desk. He sat, and she folded her hands on top of the desk. "James, I've noticed some tension," she said. "I want you to know I value your work. I also want to protect you from unfair criticism." He shook his head. "I can handle it." He replied, "I expected challenges." She leaned forward. "You shouldn't have to face resentment alone. If anything feels out of line, tell me. We'll address it together." He felt gratitude swell in his chest. "Thank you," he said, quietly. That evening, James stayed late to finish a report on employee morale. The office was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner. He typed the final sentences and saved the file. As he closed his laptop, he heard footsteps. Carla emerged from her office. She looked tired but determined. She held out her hand. He nodded and followed her into a small meeting room. Carla closed the door and leaned against the wall. She looked at him and said, "I owe you an apology." James blinked. He had not expected this. "I was harsh earlier," she said. "I judged you because you seemed to have her ear. I worry that we'll lose our voice." He folded his arms, unsure. "I understand the concern," he said, "but Emma invited input from everyone. I don't want to speak for her or push anyone out." Carla sighed. "I see that now. You handled the meeting with grace. I respect that." She paused, then added, "If you ever need support, let me know. I can help bridge gaps." He felt a weight lift. "Thank you, Carla," he said. They shook hands and he left the room. With relief, the next day, Emma held a town hall in the main lobby. James joined her on stage. She spoke to the gathered staff, reminding them of the company's mission and the human side of business. She shared updates on the acquisition and invited questions. When the floor opened, a junior developer asked about career growth under the new leadership. Emma answered honestly and asked James to share his experience so far. Spoke about learning. From her example and being invited to contribute, he emphasized that every voice mattered. The crowd responded with applause. After the town hall, a group of employees gathered around James to congratulate him on his speech. He smiled, accepting their thanks. He noticed Carla in the crowd, giving him a small nod of approval. His confidence grew. He realized that standing up and speaking his truth had earned respect. Later that week, Emma invited James and a few volunteers to brainstorm the next phase of a mentorship program. They gathered around a table in the community center they had used before. They sketched ideas on a large sheet of paper, pairing new hires with experienced staff, scheduling monthly check-ins, hosting skill-building workshops. Emma facilitated with care, ensuring each person spoke. James marveled at how she balanced leadership and humility. As they wrapped up, Emma caught James's eye. She mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded back, feeling close to her again. That evening, as James packed his bag to leave, he found a fresh note on his desk. "Great job today." It was unsigned but kind. He smiled, crumpled the note gently, and placed it in his pocket. He walked toward the elevator, feeling content. Day's tests had shown him that true leadership required standing firm and speaking up. And true teamwork meant listening and respecting each other. A week later, Emma faced her own test. During a board meeting, one of the company's investors questioned the cost of the mentorship program and community outreach. He warned that such initiatives could hurt the bottom line. Emma looked around the polished boardroom. The investors sat in high-backed chairs, their faces serious. She took a steady breath and spoke with conviction. Investing in people is not a cost. It builds loyalty, innovation, and resilience. I saw firsthand how our team responded when we showed we cared. She told the story of the cafe encounter, of how James's kindness led to stronger connections and new ideas. The investors listened in silence. James sat near the back of the room. He watched Emma's confidence and felt pride. When she finished, one investor leaned forward. "I see your point," he said slowly. Another investor nodded. Soon the board agreed to fund the programs. Emma thanked them, and the meeting ended. Afterward, in the hallway, colleagues gathered around Emma and James. They clapped him on the back, praising his support. Emma turned to James and said, "You were with me in that room." "Thank you." He smiled, touched. "I had a great teacher," he replied. That night, as James walked home under the streetlights, he thought about the tests they had faced. He remembered the sticky notes and the whispered rumors. He remembered standing up in that boardroom and the feeling of solidarity. When the board voted in their favor, he realized that loyalty and integrity mattered more than comfort or approval. When he reached his apartment, he sat at his kitchen table and pulled out the crumpled notes he had kept. He smoothed them flat and read each one. "Nice perks." "Is she your girlfriend?" "Great job today." He smiled at the mix of criticism and encouragement. Each note told a story of fear, misunderstanding, and eventually respect. He placed the notes in a drawer. He turned off the light and headed to bed. As he drifted off, he thought of Emma's promise. "We'll face challenges together." He felt ready for whatever lay ahead. He knew that small acts of kindness and moments of honesty could shape outcomes in ways no one expected. And he believed that with trusted friends and clear purpose, they could weather any storm. 6 months passed, like pages in a book. The memory of that rainy morning stayed with both of them, but now the sky was clear and bright. Emma had organized a community fundraiser at the same little cafe where they first met. The tables were set up on the sidewalk, shaded by striped umbrellas. A bunting fluttered in the gentle breeze. James arrived early, carrying boxes of supplies and a stack of flyers. His steps felt light, as if each one carried the weight of the past months, but also a sense of accomplishment. When he entered the cafe, the barista grinned at him and said, "Back for another round?" James laughed and set down the boxes. He remembered the rich smell of coffee and baked bread that morning. Now those same scents brought hope and warmth. He saw Emma arranging chairs for the guests. She wore a simple dress in soft blue, and her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. She looked relaxed and happy. "Morning," James said, handing her a box of napkins. She smiled and took them. "Good morning," she replied. "Thank you for coming so early." He shrugged. "I wouldn't miss this." At the volunteers setting up donation tables, there were canned goods, clothing, school supplies, and handmade blankets. Banner read, Community Cares, Coffee and Kindness Fundraiser. He placed the flyers on the front table. As more people arrived, Emma greeted them by name. She shook hands, asked about their families, and listened with genuine interest. James watched her, remembering how she had once changed out of a suit into jeans to help at a community center. She was back among the neighbors and friends. He felt proud to stand beside her. At 10 o'clock, the cafe owner cleared his throat and called everyone's attention. He thanked them for coming and introduced Emma and James. The crowd quieted. Emma walked to the front, accompanied by James. She cleared her throat and smiled. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "This cafe holds a special place in my heart. 6 months ago, I met someone here who reminded me of the power of a small kindness. He paid for my coffee. When my card was declined and that simple gesture changed my life." She looked at James, who stood quietly beside her. The crowd turned to him with curiosity. Emma continued, "That man is James Brooks. He showed me that compassion costs almost nothing, but can mean the world. Since then, we have worked together to bring help and hope to our community. Today's fundraiser is part of that journey." She paused and people nodded, some wiping their eyes. "We have raised funds for the food pantry, for school supplies, and for blankets for families in need. Every dollar you give today will support programs that uplift our neighbors." James listened as Emma spoke. He remembered how nervous he had been to share ideas, to speak at a town hall, to stand up in a boardroom. But now here he was, sharing a moment of gratitude with dozens of people. When Emma finished, she invited James to say a few words. He stepped forward and looked at the faces before him, friends, co-workers, volunteers, neighbors. He took a breath. "I never expected that paying for someone's coffee would lead me here," he began. His voice was calm but sincere. "I did what any of us might do if we saw someone in need. I didn't know her story, and she didn't know mine. But that moment sparked a partnership and a friendship that changed both of us." He paused and looked at Emma. "Working with Emma has shown me that kindness and leadership go hand in hand. She taught me to see the bigger picture, to lift others up, and to include every voice. Together we have strengthened our community in ways I never imagined." The crowd applauded. James smiled and stepped back. Emma nodded gratefully and returned to the microphone. The fundraiser continued with live music, silent auction items, and cups of coffee flowing freely. Children ran between tables, drawing pictures and laughing. Neighbors shared stories of how the community center and the food pantry had helped them during hard times. James walked among them, shaking hands and exchanging smiles. By midday, the crowd had raised a substantial amount. Emma consulted with the cafe owner and volunteers, directing them to count the donations and tally the auction bids. James helped load boxes of canned goods into a van destined for the pantry. He felt the warmth of working side by side with people who cared. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Emma approached him with 2 fresh coffees. She handed one to James and said, "Here's our favorite, strong, sweet, and warming." James accepted the cup and inhaled deeply. "Thank you," he said. He raised his mug. "To kindness," he toasted lightly. "Us." Emma lifted her cup. "To kindness," she agreed. They walked out from behind the tables and sat on a low brick wall. At the edge of the sidewalk, the noise of the fundraiser felt distant. Birds perched on the cafe's sign and chirped softly. The sun felt gentle on their faces. James took a sip of coffee. It tasted like caramel and cinnamon, just as it had that rainy morning. He looked at Emma, seeing her relaxed smile and the way her eyes softened in the light. "I still remember how shocked I was to see my card decline," she said, her voice soft. "I thought I had enough. Then you stepped in." She paused. "I was embarrassed, but you made me feel human, not lesser." "How?" James nodded. "You would have done the same for me if our roles were reversed." Emma smiled. "Maybe, but I needed that reminder." They sat quietly for a moment. Emma stirred her coffee and looked at the bustling cafe. "Do you ever wonder how one small act of kindness can set off so many actions?" she asked, James thought. I do. It's like a pebble dropped in a pond. The ripples keep going out farther than you ever see. Emma nodded. Exactly. James took another sip and said, I've learned a lot from working with you. Not just about business, but about people. Emma laughed softly. And I've learned from you about stepping out of my office and listening to everyday voices. She reached over and touched his arm.
Thank you for helping me remember why
I started this. He looked at her hand on his arm and said, and thank you for inviting me along this journey. They shared a warm smile. Later, as the fundraiser wound down, they helped the cafe owners sweep the sidewalk. Emma swept one side, James the other. Their movements were casual but in sync. The evening light grew golden. When they finished, they leaned on their brooms and surveyed the clean sidewalk strewn with a few fallen leaves. Emma set her broom aside and said, Shall we get one last? Coffee before we go? James grinned and picked up his broom. I thought you'd never ask. They walked back inside the cafe. The barista greeted them warmly and prepared the coffees without asking the order. He knew now what they liked. Emma and James carried their cups to the window table where James had sat that first morning. They settled into the chairs side by side. James looked at Emma and said, Who would have thought a cup of coffee could lead to this? Emma shrugged playfully and took a sip. Coffee is powerful, she said with a grin. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee and watching the last guests depart. The cafe was empty now except for them. Soft hum of the lights above and the faint smell of brewed beans filled the air. Outside, the sky turned pink with the sunset. The day had been long, but rewarding. Emma set her cup down and said, One day, I'd like to pay it forward again. Find someone who needs a lift and help them, without them knowing who I am. James nodded. I'd like that. Maybe we can do it together. She looked at him with bright eyes. Together. Raise his cup once more. To 1,000,000 more. Small acts, he said. Emma lifted her mug. To 1,000,000 ripples, she agreed. They clinked their cups and finished their coffee. As they stood, Emma put an arm around James's shoulder. Ready to go? She asked. He smiled. Let's go. They walked out of the cafe into the evening glow, side by side. The memory of a rainy morning had transformed into a story of connection, community, and kindness. And as they disappeared down the street, the cafe lights behind them shone softly, waiting for the next chapter to begin.